My name is Sarah Thompson. I'm a 46-year-old single mother living with my 17-year-old son, Ethan. Our lives changed dramatically 5 years ago when I divorced my ex-husband, David. But that change wasn't necessarily a bad one. "Mom, what's for dinner tonight?" Ethan asks as he comes home from school, opening the fridge as usual. "Chicken pot pie. That was your father's favorite, wasn't it?" I reply, and Ethan's expression clouds for a moment. After the divorce, talking about David had become taboo between us. But recently, as the wounds have begun to heal, we've started to be able to talk about him little by little. "Right, and I like it too," Ethan says with a smile. I stand in the kitchen and start preparing dinner. Outside the window, maple leaves are beginning to turn red and yellow, heralding the arrival of autumn. Over these past 5 years, as the seasons have changed, our lives have also moved forward bit by bit. The divorce from David was sudden. Due to his work, we had been living apart more and more. Then one day, I got a phone call from him saying, "I can't do this anymore." Later, I found out he had remarried a woman he met through work. "Mom, I've finished my homework. Anything I can help with?" Ethan pokes his head into the kitchen. "Thank you, honey. Could you set the table?" Ethan nods silently and starts taking plates out of the cupboard. He seems to have grown up suddenly after the divorce. Is he trying to fill the void left by his father's absence? As we eat dinner, Ethan tells me about what happened at school. Listening to him talk, I'm reminded once again of how precious this time with my son is. After the divorce, our bond seems to have grown stronger. As I'm washing the dishes after the meal, Ethan suddenly says, "Mom, about Dad." I stop what I'm doing and turn to face him. "What is it?" "I've been getting emails from Dad lately. He wants to meet." My heart feels like it stops for a moment. David contacting our son. I see. And how do you feel about that? I ask, trying to appear calm. Ethan thinks for a moment before answering. "I'm not sure. Part of me wants to see him, but I'm also scared." I put my hand on my son's shoulder. "That's understandable. You don't have to decide right away. Let's think about it together." That night, lying in bed, I found myself thinking about David. About his new family, and about what we had lost. But at the same time, I felt the importance of the new life Ethan and I had built together. Tomorrow is a new day. Our little family will continue to move forward, facing the future. "Mom, look. It's a tourist guide for New York." Ethan burst into the living room, excitedly waving a magazine. There was just a month left until Thanksgiving break. We were planning our first trip to New York City. "Let me see," I say, sitting down next to Ethan as we flip through the pages together. The Statue of Liberty, the Empire State Building, Central Park, they all look wonderful. "I want to go to Times Square too," Ethan says, his eyes shining. Actually, this trip was my idea. I'd noticed recently that Ethan seemed a bit down. Maybe he was feeling stressed about the upcoming college entrance exams. So I suggested the New York trip, hoping it might help take his mind off things. All right then, let's book the flight and hotel tomorrow, I say, and Ethan nods happily. That night, as I was making a list of things to prepare for the trip, I suddenly remembered David. When we were newlyweds, we had promised to go to New York together. But as work got busier, that promise was never fulfilled. Now, I can fulfill that promise with Ethan. The thought warmed my heart. A few weeks later, we were on an early morning flight to New York. Mom, it's like we're flying above the clouds, Ethan exclaims, pointing out the window shortly after takeoff. You're right. It's like an ocean of cotton candy, I reply, gazing out the window too. On the plane, we made plans for our trip. The Statue of Liberty, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, a Broadway musical. As we talked, I noticed Ethan's eyes were sparkling. Seeing his smile, which I hadn't seen much recently, lightened my heart. When we arrived in New York and took a taxi to our hotel, we were mesmerized by the city views. The skyscrapers, the busy people rushing about, and the hustle and bustle heard everywhere. Wow, it's so different from what we see on TV, Ethan murmurs. After checking into the hotel, we immediately set out to explore the city. Our first destination was Central Park. The sight of colorful leaves falling in the crisp autumn air was breathtakingly beautiful. Mom, look over there. Ethan points to people rowing boats on the lake. Want to try it? I ask, and Ethan nods excitedly. As we leisurely rowed across the lake, we enjoyed a long, relaxed conversation for the first time in a while. About school, about friends, and then, Mom, actually. Ethan hesitates before continuing. I've been thinking about Dad. I stop rowing for a moment and look into Ethan's eyes. I see. Do you want to see him? Ethan was quiet for a while, but eventually nodded slowly. Yes. But I don't want to make you sad. I squeeze my son's hand. I understand how you feel. We'll think about it together when we get back home. That night, Ethan fell asleep quickly in our hotel room. I stood by the window, looking out at the New York City night skyline, lost in thought. Reuniting with David. Perhaps that's an unavoidable challenge for me too. But for now, I decided to focus on enjoying this precious time with my dear son right in front of me. With that resolve, I lay down in bed. Tomorrow, we're going to Broadway. Another new memory is about to be made. On the morning of our third day in New York, we were riding the subway to Brooklyn. Ethan was engrossed in reading the guidebook. Mom, the history of the Brooklyn Bridge is really interesting. It says some people even died in accidents during its construction. I smile at my son's enthusiasm for learning. That's right. Historical structures often carry the hopes and dreams of many people. The subway car was crowded with the morning rush hour. People of various ethnicities were squeezed together, embodying New York's diversity. Suddenly, Ethan grabbed my arm. Mom, look over there. As I looked in the direction he was pointing, my heart nearly stopped. David had just entered through the opposite door. But he wasn't alone. He was holding hands with a young woman and a little girl. Dad. Ethan's voice was trembling. I instinctively pulled Ethan into the next car. Hide, I whispered to him. We held our breath and observed David and his family from the adjacent car. David had the little girl on his lap and seemed to be talking to her happily. The woman next to him, presumably his new wife, was smiling gently. Mom, that's Dad's new family, isn't it? Ethan's voice was filled with complex emotions. I was at a loss for words. Seeing David looking so happy, I felt a tightness in my chest. But at the same time, I also felt a strange sense of relief. Ethan, are you okay? I placed my hand on my son's shoulder. He was quiet for a moment but then slowly nodded. Yes. But I want to keep watching. We quietly moved to a position where we could see David and his family. They hadn't noticed us. David was still happily chatting with his daughter. Watching them brought back memories. Playing in the park with David when Ethan was little. Christmases we spent as a family. And then, how our relationship gradually cooled. Next stop is Brooklyn Bridge Park Station. The announcement jolted us back to reality. Mom, let's get off too, Ethan says with a determined look on his face. I hesitated for a moment but decided to respect my son's feelings. All right. But about talking to them? Not now, Ethan interrupts me. I want to know more about Dad first. I felt my son's maturity and quietly nodded. As we arrived at the station, we decided to quietly follow David and his family. Walking through the streets of Brooklyn, my heart was filled with complex emotions. Was this the right thing to do, or were we invading their privacy? But seeing Ethan's serious expression, I realized this encounter might have been unavoidable. As we walked through the streets of Brooklyn, we kept our distance while following David and his family. The early summer weather made the green of the street trees vibrant. Mom, where do you think they're going? Ethan whispers. I'm not sure. Let's watch for a little longer. It seemed that David and his family were heading towards Brooklyn Bridge Park. When they arrived at the park, they sat down on the grass and started taking food out of a basket. It looked like they were having a picnic. We hid in the shade of a tree a little distance away, observing them. David started playing catch with his daughter, while his wife was reading a book on the blanket. Seeing this happy family scene made my heart ache. Dad is laughing. Ethan's voice was trembling. I hugged my son. Yes, he looks happy. After a while, David and his family started packing up. We got up too and began following them again. They left the park and entered a residential area in Brooklyn. Suddenly, David and his family stopped in front of a large building. The sign read, Brooklyn Community Center. I wonder what? I muttered, but Ethan said, let's go in, Mom, and started walking ahead. We entered the building and asked at the reception, excuse me, the people who just came in, where did they go? The receptionist smiled and answered, oh, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson. They're volunteering on the second floor hall. It's an English class for refugees. Ethan and I exchanged surprised looks. David doing volunteer work. We quietly went up to the second floor and reached the entrance of the hall. We opened the door slightly and could see inside. David was standing in front of a blackboard, explaining something enthusiastically. The classroom was filled with people of various nationalities, all listening intently. David's wife was walking among the students, answering individual questions. "Wow," Ethan whispered. "I had no idea Dad was doing something like this." I was speechless too. I realized I hadn't tried to learn about David's life after the divorce. He had grown so much and was contributing to society in this way. After a while, the class ended and the students started leaving. We quickly hid behind the staircase. David, his wife, and daughter came out last. Seeing their smiles, I felt something melt inside me. "Mom," Ethan grabbed my hand. "I want to meet Dad." I took a deep breath and looked into my son's eyes. "All right. Maybe it's time for us to meet too." We quietly went down the stairs and followed David and his family. My heart was pounding. I didn't know what was going to happen, but I was certain that this moment would greatly change our lives. As we followed David and his family out of the community center, my heart was racing. My hand holding Ethan's was slightly damp with sweat. "Mom, are you really okay?" Ethan asks worriedly. I took a deep breath and answered, "Yes, I'm okay. Thank you for being here with me." David and his family were walking towards the park. The evening park was bathed in an orange light. When we saw them sit down on a bench in the shade of a tree, we stopped. "This is our chance," I nodded to Ethan, and we slowly approached David and his family. "David." He turned around, surprised at my voice. "Sarah." "Ethan." David's eyes widened. "Why are you here?" After a moment of silence, we started talking. At first, there was an awkward atmosphere, but gradually the conversation became more natural. David's new wife, Lisa, greeted us with a kind smile. "Sarah, Ethan, it's nice to meet you. I've heard a lot about you from David." I was surprised. "You've been talking about us." David laughs, looking a bit embarrassed. "Yes, I've talked about you often. Especially you, Ethan. I'm proud of you." Tears glistened in Ethan's eyes. "Really?" As the conversation progressed, the misunderstandings we had been holding on to slowly started to dissolve. David told us about how he had chosen to leave suddenly due to work circumstances, and how he still regretted that decision. "Sarah, there's something I want to apologize for." David's voice was tinged with deep regret. "Back then, I left without properly talking things through. I'm truly sorry." I felt a tightness in my chest. "David, I should have tried harder to understand your feelings too." Lisa gently interjects, "Both of you, we can't change the past, but things can be different from now on, right?" We looked at each other and nodded slightly. Then, seeing Ethan and David's daughter Emily talking happily together, we were reminded of the importance of family bonds. "Mom, what's going to happen to us from now on?" Ethan asks anxiously. I put my arm around Ethan's shoulders and looked at David. "Well, we'll figure it out together. The important thing is that we're all connected." David nodded too, saying, "That's right. From now on, let's build a new relationship together." In the park, as the sun was setting, we began to explore a new form of family. The pain of the past won't disappear easily, but we all felt a new hope for the future beginning to sprout. The next day, we agreed to meet again in Central Park. In the crisp morning air, we waited by the lake for David and his family. "Mom, are you nervous?" Ethan watches my expression. I smiled and answered, "A little. But I'm also looking forward to it." We could see David and his family walking towards us from a distance. Lisa waved, and Emily ran up to us happily. "Good morning, Sarah, Ethan," David greets us with a warm smile. As we walked along the lake, we talked about our lives up to now and our hopes for the future. Ethan was enthusiastically telling David about his school life and his dreams for the future. "Your son has really grown into a fine young man," Lisa says to me kindly. I answered with gratitude, "Thank you. Emily is growing into a lovely girl too." At lunchtime, we spread out a picnic blanket and enjoyed a meal together. The children played frisbee together, while the adults engaged in peaceful conversation. "Sarah," David looks at me with a serious expression. "I'm truly sorry. Back then, I should have faced things with more courage." I took a deep breath and quietly answered, "I feel the same way, David. We both made mistakes." Lisa gently intervenes, "But those mistakes led to this moment today. It's a wonderful chance for all of us to create a new kind of family." We smiled at each other, finding hope in this new relationship. In the afternoon, when the children wanted to go boating, we headed to the lake. As I watched David, Ethan, and Emily get into a boat together, tears welled up in my eyes. "Are you okay?" Lisa asks gently. "Yes. I just never thought a day like this would come," I answered honestly. Lisa nods understandingly. "We're a big family now. We can all support each other." Seeing Ethan's smiling face as he returned from the boat ride, I truly felt that way. This wasn't an ending, but a new beginning. As evening approached, it was time for us to part. "We'll see each other again, right?" Ethan asks, sounding a bit anxious. David puts his arm around his son's shoulders and answers, "Of course. From now on, let's spend more time together." We exchanged contact information and made plans to meet again. As we were saying goodbye, I said to David and Lisa, "Thank you so much for today. We don't know what the future holds, but let's take it one step at a time." David nods. "That's right. Let's work together to create a new kind of family." On our way back, Ethan happily said to me, "Mom, I'm happy." I hugged my son and replied, "Me too, honey." Our family has grown bigger and stronger. With the New York skyline as our backdrop, we began walking towards a future filled with hope. This trip had brought us unexpected encounters and reconciliation, opening a new chapter in our lives.